satellites have become vital tools for today's archaeologists.
The importance of satellite photography is it allows us to cover vastly greater areas than was ever possible before.
Now, new techniques like infrared satellite imaging are enabling analysts all over the world to discover structures hidden for millennia.
When we switch to infrared, which is a type of light that we cannot see, suddenly a pattern pops out.
One of the most exciting infrared discoveries in recent years is the street plan of the Egyptian city of Tanis on the Nile Delta. The infrared sees beneath the dirt and dust of centuries to reveal buried buildings to archaeologists.
Tanis was the capital of the Egyptian pharaohs from about 1000 BC down to about 700 BC.
In the 1920s, a Frenchman, Pi-Rameses, came to Tanis searching for a lost city called Pi-Rameses. While excavating a plateau next to the modern city, he hits the mother lode. The site is littered with statues of Ramses II, the pharaoh who built the city he's hunting.
You're looking for the lost city of the pharaoh, and you find a city with his name stamped all over it. What other conclusion would you draw?
But there's a problem. Dating tests on some of the remains taken from the site near Tanis reveal that it cannot be the pharaoh's lost city.
Although all this stonework is inscribed for Ramses II, all the actual archaeological material, actually stuff which is from people living and dying there, is all from some centuries later.
If this city was built in the time of Ramses, there should be evidence from his time buried in the archaeological layers.
So the problem is this. The city is literally stamped with the name Ramses, but there is nothing that dates remotely from his era. How can that be?
The answer comes 40 years later, when another team of archaeologists discovers the remains of the pharaoh's lost city at the modern-day town of Cantir. The footings of his statues are still in place, where they were ripped from the ground and moved. There can only be one conclusion. At some point in history, the lost city of Ramses was abandoned, dismantled, and then rebuilt at Tanis, 12 miles away.
Why and how would a whole city even move? It's just a crazy idea.
For some observers, a clue to why the people of Pi-Rameses deserted their magnificent city may come from the Bible. In the book of Exodus, God unleashes a series of terrible plagues on Egypt to persuade the Pharaoh to release the Israelites from slavery.
If you're going to move an entire city, you need a really good reason to do that. And you don't get much better reason than the great Egyptian plagues.
Plagues can have a sudden, devastating effect on cities. History is filled with outbreaks of disease, forcing thousands of people to flee their homes.
This is not unusual at all. There's many examples, especially in the Mediterranean.
In Croatia, the town of Trigran, which was once a prosperous medieval city, but was so weakened by probably both plague and malaria. By the 1650s, there was just a handful of families still living there, and by the end of the 17th century, had been abandoned and was just a ruined city.
The plagues in the book of Exodus tell of hailstorms, day turning to night, water turning to blood, and terrifying infestations. Could they have forced the people of Pi-Rameses to move their entire city to a safer location?
The stories of the 10 great Egyptian plagues are some of the most terrifying and dramatic in the entire Bible. But what if they're more than just stories?
Over the last couple of decades, there have been scientists and historians that have come up with scientific explanations of how this series of plagues could have occurred.
Some suggest satellite images of an island in the Mediterranean called Santorini could offer a clue to the origin of the most devastating biblical plagues. The ancient Greeks called the island Thera, and it was the site of one of the biggest volcanic eruptions in known history.
Thera was 4 times larger than the infamous eruption of Krakatoa.
Pumice from Thera was found at the site of Pi-Rameses.
The presence of volcanic ash leads some to believe that this mega eruption may have triggered some of the plagues described in the Bible.
The eruption of this volcano could produce ash falls and rocks that could literally fall out of the sky, creating that plague of hail that is mentioned in the Bible. The cover of ash over the entire Mediterranean would have led to darkness.
As the massive plumes of ash covered Egypt, it could have created the conditions for the most devastating plague of all, the death of the firstborn.
The volcanic ash could actually cause the food supply to be contaminated. Since the firstborn were the ones that got the best and the first of the food, they would have eaten that contaminated food and may have led to the plague, the death of the firstborn.
On the face of it, the theory that the mega eruption could have triggered events that led to Pi-Rameses being abandoned seems compelling. But archaeologists discover that the dates of the eruption at Thera and the uprooting of Pi-Rameses simply don't match.
The eruption of Thera was roughly 3,600 years ago.
It's happening centuries before Ramesses, and therefore can have nothing to do with his time.
Even if the plagues of Egypt were real, they couldn't have triggered the move. So the question is, what did?
The archaeologists who first discovered Pi-Rameses thought they'd found the reason when they discovered traces of an old river near the city that had somehow disappeared. In the 1960s, the only way to prove a river had once flowed there was by painstaking fieldwork and surveys. Today, scientists need only to look at infrared satellite images of the area. Old riverbeds contain mineral deposits which help plants grow. And because plants reflect light in the infrared spectrum, satellites can pick out these ancient waterways long after the water has disappeared.
You can spot old river channels by the pattern that the vegetation is making on the ground. The electromagnetic spectrum gives us the ability to look beyond what the human eye can see.
When observers apply an infrared filter to the Nile Delta, its ancient channels should miraculously appear. And one of those used to run through Pi-Rameses. But over time, it changed course to run through Tanis, leaving the Pharaoh's city with no water supply.
As its river branch dried up, Pi-Rameses became less and less viable as a capital city. And therefore, the pharaohs moved their residence to Tanis.
Put yourself in their shoes. Their city is dying. What would you do?
Rather than quarrying new stone hundreds of miles away, they simply used the ruins of the now derelict Pi-Rameses as their quarry, and therefore over a period of a number of centuries, blocks, obelisks, colossal statues were all shipped across to Tanis, where they form part of the new city.
Satellites have shed new light on the mysteries of Tanis, and these discoveries are only the beginning of a new era in the exploration of the ancient world.